played the Elder Scrolls Online for a long time, you'll notice that one of the business models for ESO that was recently pushed was the play as you want. The original ESO model was built around, if you remember the old commercials way back when the game first came out. Their original business model centered on massive sieges, talking about PvP, because it was advertised for PvP. ESO, when it first came out, was advertised as a PvP game. It was advertised as, huge sieges, huge siege wars, hundreds of players on your screen, no lag. That was their business model for the Elder Scrolls Online. It was primarily designed around player versus player interaction, with huge keep fights, hundreds of players on your screen. That's what they showed. If you remember the old commercials, it was like people on keeps, and you see people like light attacking and swinging their swords. You saw like people throwing out animations, magic builds throwing out animations, and the original old school, advertising centered around player versus player PvP environment in open world Cyrodiil. When that model failed because ESO failed to deliver a good game in terms of the game being stable, and then after the lighting patch ruined PvP for a long time. So the vast majority of the players left. But if you remember Angry Joe's ESO video, in his video he had huge numbers of PvP, huge numbers of players in his video. I don't know if you can take a look at it here. Let me just pause this right here. If you remember old school Angry Joe's original video, in terms of the amount of players that he had on his screen, where there was actual no lag. I'm going to look right back at the very beginning of it. So looking at Angry Joe's video right here, you can see his original. This is before everything. You can see like the amount of players. This was the angry army. I mean, there's so many players. And so when this died, right, when the ability to run this many people on your screen, and not lag. I mean, he's got probably well over 100 people. He's got well over 100 people that are here. You see nobody's lying. It is before, this takes place before the lighting patch and some of the numerous changes that actually took place in the Elder Scrolls Online. When the ability to run large numbers of players like that died, then vast majority of the population. If you also remember way back during that time period, people knew how to lag the server, and it was told it was like the spamming of abilities. And so what you would do is, I remember watching one day on King Richard's stream where he was talking about this, where people would intentionally lag the server by just sitting in a corner, and he found like a group of 10 people literally sitting in stealth in a corner outside of a keep, and they were just sitting there spamming healing springs over and over and over again. They were just that's all they were doing. They weren't in the middle of combat. They were in sneak out in a corner somewhere, just spamming healing circle over and over and over again to lag the server. Unfortunately, ZeniMax never did anything to players who were intentionally ruining the experience of other players. And so along came what is now the ESO's kind of business model of the play as you want. So I play all characters. I have Templars. I have 2 different Templars. I got a Magic of Stamina, Nightblade, Magic of Stamina Soric, Magic of Stamina DK. I've got, I think, only one. I've got 2 Warden, Magic of Stamina Warden, and then a Magica. I think I've got just the one that I flip flop between on my Necromancer. And so now you have the business model, play as you want. Why does the business model, play as you want, has been ruining the Elder Scrolls Online for a very long time? The primary reason is because if you remember playing, the way many of the classes were designed specifically for specific things, right? Templars are designed around healing. The original intent was designed around healing. Even to this day, DK designed around tanking. Warden designed also around off healing with some damage. In terms of burst potential, Sork was always designed around being, originally was designed around being a very mobile Magicka user that had a lot of burst, but then was designed to be fairly squishy, which is why originally had lots of mobility to remain mobile on the battlefield, so that it could avoid being, caught by multiple opponents, because then it could be easily brought down. Same thing with, if you're, for example, Nightblade. Nightblade was designed around a lot of single target burst, with utilizing things like Cloak to minimize the amount of damage, because they didn't have good damage reduction as well as good healing. That, of course, turned around because of the players you want. As more PvPers left and more casual players came into the game, you had less skilled players entering the game who, instead of learning how to play, wanted ESO to give them all the tools that they needed to be successful. This is why if you ever look at someone's parse, a huge amount of the damage just comes from light attacking. It's like 20%. If you know how to weave, think about that. Like, even to this day, like, you can go to the ESO forums and there's always a forum post about removing animation canceling and about removing weaving, primarily light attack weaving. And yet, if you ever look at someone's parse, like, literally 20% of their damage just comes from weaving. And then an additional 20% of their damage comes from sets. Like, if you ever looked at, I looked at someone's parse, somebody posted some parse, they did like 100k, and it was, what was the set? Perfected something. I just want to take a look at it here. Learn the spell. Perfected. There we go. So it's the perfected. Where is it? Here, the perfected. Not that one. Is it the YOLO? No. So here we go. It's the perfected low, whatever it is, right? So as you can see there, it says it guarantees you 5% extra damage, right? When you're doing trials, dungeons, doing dungeons, trials, and arena monsters. 5% right off the top, right? So if you're doing 100% of your damage, 5% is immediately given to you by the ESO developers, right? So that 5% you're not even doing, right? All you have to do is just put any amount of damage, and ESO is giving you a minimum of 5% damage. But if you know how to spam your X button or whatever button it is for your synergy, ESO says we will give you an additional 15%. So an immediate, in terms of 100% of the damage that you do, 20% right off the top, just given to you as a PvEer. So when you have more players like this entering your game and more PvPers leave because the skill cap is being lowered and lowered, what you have is you have players being introduced into the PvP realm, and that's why PvP is just more and more uncompetitive. And this is exactly why. Because in the PvE world, like, literally almost all of their damage in a PvE setting is given to the player. If you ever watch people who like pull up like 100k parses, most of their damage is done for free. Like light attack damage is done for free. I mean, if you know how to light attack is like light attack animation casting is not that big of a deal to be able to light attack and just perform a skill. It's a very simple function. And for some reason, a lot of people just don't want to learn how to do it because they want things to be given to them. Most people run some sort of a proc set. Typically, that proc set is going to be about between 3, 4, maybe even 5% of their damage. On top, like if you've seen like the Necromancer post, where literally Blast Bones was 20% of his damage, light attacking was at 10%. I think it was like 10% or about, yeah, it was about 10%. So just between his light attack and Blast Bones was 30% of his damage, right? And then another 3.5% for the proc set, and then there was like another 1.something%. So literally like 25% of all of his damage was just between a light attack, a proc set, and then him rotating Blast Bones, which is ridiculous. And that's why in the play as you want model, the reason why it becomes such a problem is because certain classes were designed, like for example Templar. Templar was specifically designed around big heals. It really didn't have that much damage because it had such huge heals. So what happens is people are like, well, why can't Templars, put out the exact same amount of damage as like sorcerers, right? the sword class that is designed around burst damage, low survivability, weak heals, high mobility, you know, doesn't have the heals that a Templar has. And so people were like, well, why can't Templar do as much damage as that? And instead of the developers coming out and just saying that specific classes are designed around different functions, high burst, mobility. The problem is that this was designed around PvP. It's very important. The functions of the original classes were designed around PvP, not so much designed around PvE. Right? Because you don't really need all that mobility on a Magicosaur, because no one uses streak in PvP. I mean PvE. No one uses streak in PvE. Right? No one's sitting there running around streaking trying to avoid damage and roll dodging in PvE. They mostly just sit there and cast damage shields over and over and over again and rely on somebody else to heal them. Of course, in PvP that doesn't take place. You need the mobility on a sorcerer to avoid damage. And so because so many forum PvEers complained about my Templar can't deal as much damage as a Magicosaur in PvE, and they're like, well, we need to boost Templar. But then it was like, how do you boost Templar damage to Magicosaur damage when the class has these ridiculous heals because it's designed as a healer? And then people are like, well, if Templar is going to get, you know, the amount of damage that we're going to get, well, then you need to boost our healing, right? And so this is what you have perpetually, right? It's the same thing. People say it all the time. Necromancers deal, you know, all endgame is revolving around Necromancer classes because, you know, because of the Colossus and 30%, you know, vulnerability. And so what you need to make it just as viable, which you can't. It's not even possible because you push the power creep up so high. And it's just because the developers don't want to tell their player base that classes are designed for specific roles and remove the players you want, because they were thinking, oh, we're going to draw in, you know, tons of people. What they realize is they fucked their game. That whole play as you want model completely fucked over their game. Instead of saying that you can casually play how you want in a comment by a developer in like a forum post, in terms of, yes, you can casually play like in dungeons and normal dungeons, but for competitive play, you know, there always is going to be a meta. Otherwise, if we just homogenize all the classes, all you're doing is just basically picking a skin and everything else is irrelevant because everything does pretty much the exact same function, same damage. So it's like all you're doing is picking the animation. The animation is different. And then classes just become irrelevant. And so instead of just coming out and say that, they keep pushing this play as you want model. And as a result, this is why you always see people that are like, oh, my class, because most of the changes are PvE changes. Most of the changes are designed around changing PvE because people complain that my class doesn't put out as much damage. People complain all the time. Bow is not reliable. You'll get like Lyco that'll put out like 100k bow build, and people are like, well, that's him, it's not me, right? I want to be able to do it. And instead of just saying, well, just because you can't do it doesn't mean other people can't do it. People complain. I mean, I don't know how many forum posts that I read today. You know, people are talking about the constant desire to remove animation canceling, not realizing how important animation cancels is. You're in the middle of, for example, of hitting somebody with Jesus Beam, and then someone comes in gap closing and about to ult you, and you just started your beam. If you could not animation cancel the beam with a block, you would just automatically eat all the damage because you'd be stuck in the 1.8 second beam. That's the same thing, for example, with Soul Assault. If you got, you know, attacked by a Nightblade and sneak, and you were sitting there with a 4 second cast time on a beam, you wouldn't be able to break it so you can block the damage and then fight that person. Same thing with like block canceling. If you actually sit there and wait for the animation before you could actually recast Breath of Life, you'd more than likely be dead. So it's like the need, people are always constantly talking about the desire to remove animation cancel, and it's primarily because of PvE. Primarily because of PvE, because there's a huge amount. If you ever look at someone's parse, if you ever go to like an ESO forums and look at their parses that people put up, most of the parse damage is light attack. It's a simple light attack. And that's the dumbing down of the ESO combat, because previously, when the game was more competitive, you actually had to time your heavy attacks in PvE to gain resources, and then they removed the ability to bash, heavy attacks, which lower the ceiling. made it easier to gain your resources back via heavy attacks. It's one of the reasons why dual wield heavy armor overperforms, is because their heavy attacks are so quick, and you just sit there and you gain resources all day that you don't even need to worry about running any sort of regen in your build, because most people, even if you block it, you're still going to get 50% resource return. Most people don't block it. And since the heavy attack is free, even if you dodge roll it, it costs me nothing to do. It costs you resources to roll dodge and mitigate the damage and mitigate my ability to return resources, but it didn't cost me anything. All it did is cost me a global in tossing out a heavy attack. And so it's this perpetual play as you want mentality. It is killing the game. It's killing the game. It's driving players away, because all that happens is you just keep on dumbing down the game more and more and more with free shit. I mean, you look at the sets. I mean, that's a huge amount of damage, right? 15%, 20% of the damage that you deal in PvE is just given to you by the developer. On top, you wear a proc helmet, that's an additional 3 to 5%. So literally 1/4 of your damage, right, on 100k parse, is the developer just giving it to you. The developer's like, hey, are you a PvEer? Here's 25% more damage. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous amounts of damage. And the only thing that it does is it serves to push players who already know how to animation cancel and play. It just pushes their DPS parses even higher. So previously, DPS parses were, say, like 60k, right? Maybe like 2 patches ago, people were topping out at like 60, 70k. Now it's like 100k. 100k is the new parse, because they come out with more and more sets like this that just give players free damage. It's ridiculous. 20% extra damage. All you have to do is just hit whatever button it is that you use for a synergy, and the synergies typically have like a 15-30 second, but then you can just hit multiple synergies, right? There's always multiple synergies that you can hit in a trial to basically keep this thing up 100% of the time. Between that and light attacking, it's a huge amount of your damage. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that light attack damage does that much. And it's the same thing with Nightblades, right? People were like, well, I want to be able to heal on a Magic and Nightblade. I want to be able to tank on a Magic and Nightblade. I want to be able to tank just as good as the DK. And it's like, you can't do that. And because of ESO's desire to not hurt people's feelings and say, well, that's not, and it all stems from the plays you want. Because people always refer back to that. They were like, this is the model that sold people, and they were like, oh, I want to play this way. And the developers have to keep on making changes to these different abilities to kind of homogenize all the classes. And then when you homogenize all the classes, then what do people complain about? You're killing my class identity, right? So that all you have is this revolving problem that you can't avoid. And it's all because of the ESO play as you like model, which they need to throw away. Make a statement that they're redesigning the classes to do specific things, and then balance those classes around PvP. And then, because PvE is irrelevant, because they give you so much damage. It's like PvE combat is irrelevant. So much of that damage is just given to you. Like, you just show up and ZeniMax says, I'm giving you an extra 25% damage. It's stupid, ridiculous. Like, all you have to do is show up to a raid, and ZeniMax automatically gives you an additional 20 to 25%, because between that set and then running any sort of a proc helm, it's literally 25% of all your damage. It's ridiculous.